All right, so get ready because today we're diving deep into the world of Aristotle. He's one of those figures we all kind of know,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, definitely.
But his work is so vast that most of us, myself included, I have to admit, only really ever scratched the surface.
Right.
I feel like today is going to be full of aha moments as we learn more about him.
Absolutely. And I think it's easy to think about Aristotle and just think, oh, yeah, dusty old textbook. But I think there's a lot more to him than that.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're using his Wikipedia entry for this deep dive,
Yeah.
I love that because we get to sort of like uncover these twists and turns and really dive deep into his life and work right alongside you, our listeners.
I love that. It's like we're all on an archaeological dig for knowledge together.
Exactly.
So Aristotle,
Okay.
born in Stagira, 384 BC.
All right. Setting the stage.
Now, here's a fascinating little tidbit. I found his father was a physician.
Interesting.
So, do you think that early exposure to observation and analysis, his dad being a doctor,
Yeah.
shaped his way of thinking?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's certainly possible. And I think, when we're looking at somebody like Aristotle, it's important to remember that his upbringing was full of experiences that could really contributed to his intellectual development.
Right.
So we've got, orphaned young,
Right.
raised by a guardian, connected to the Macedonian court. That's quite a tapestry of influences right there.
Absolutely, yeah. And then at just 17 or 18, he travels to Athens to study with the one and only Plato.
Oh, wow.
Can you imagine those conversations at the academy?
Oh, my gosh.
That's like,
A meeting of the minds.
yeah, it's like witnessing the birth of Western philosophy.
It really is mind-blowing to think about these two, brilliant minds just like clashing, collaborating, debating for 2 decades. Imagine being a fly on the wall for those conversations.
Oh, totally.
And then for him to leave after 20 years.
Yeah.
What happened there? It makes you wonder,
What caused the rift? The philosophical parting of the ways.
Yeah, their approaches must have differed at a certain point. Or maybe, I don't know, there's got to be a story there.
There's got to be some good gossip. Okay, so let's fast forward to another fascinating chapter. Aristotle as the tutor to Alexander the Great.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about a gig.
Can you imagine?
I would love to, just for a day, be able to listen in on their conversation.
Right. Like, how do you even begin to process that? You've got Aristotle, this scholar, this champion of reason and balance, mentoring a future conqueror.
Yeah.
It's a really complicated dynamic, I think.
It really is.
Full of contradictions.
It speaks volumes about, I think, the nuances of Aristotle's thinking.
Yeah?
Because clearly, this wasn't just someone who stayed in an ivory tower, right?
Yeah.
He was clearly interacting with the world in a very real, very impactful way.
And grappling with these big questions about, power and knowledge and how they all kind of intertwine.
It makes you think. Okay, so speaking of intellect, after his time with Alexander, Aristotle went on to establish his own school in Athens, the Lyceum.
Yeah.
So was this a power play?
Mm,
Was he trying to, outdo Plato's academy?
okay.
Or was it just the inevitable path for someone who had so much knowledge to share?
That's a good question. Because we are talking about somebody who produced hundreds of books.
Hundreds.
The scale of his output is just mind-blowing.
It's incredible.
He wasn't content to just dip his toes into different disciplines.
No.
He dove in head first.
Yeah.
Revolutionized fields like logic and physics, ethics, politics, art. I mean, this was not somebody who was content with just staying in one lane.
Not at all.
A Renaissance man before they even existed.
Which I think makes his death at just 61 or 62 in Chalcis all the more tragic.
Yeah.
He left Athens. There were whispers surrounding his relationship with Alexander. This kind of abrupt end to such a prolific life.
Yeah.
I don't know, it just feels like there's this air of mystery surrounding his final days.
Right. There's always that little bit of intrigue when it comes to these larger-than-life figures.
Yeah.
But I think instead of getting too caught up in speculation about how he died,
Okay.
let's focus on this immense legacy that he left behind. A legacy so impactful that he's often hailed as the first teacher, which I think is just incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's the perfect segue to start unpacking some of his work because he really did cover it all.
He really did.
And what better place to begin than with this idea of first philosophy? Now, I have to admit, for those of us who, aren't philosophy scholars, can you break down what metaphysics actually is?
Okay, so in a nutshell, think of metaphysics as diving into the very essence of reality.
Okay.
Like, it's pondering those really big questions. What is the nature of existence? What does it even mean to be?
Ooh.
Right? It's about trying to understand those fundamental principles that govern everything around us.
So he was basically trying to create a blueprint for how we understand the world.
In a way, yeah, you could say that. I mean, the title First Teacher really is quite fitting when you think about it.
Totally. But he didn't stop there, though, did he?
Oh, no, not at all.
He also revolutionized the way that we think and argue with his work on logic.
Yeah, he did.
Tell me more about that.
So Aristotle was just fascinated by the structure of thought itself.
Hmm.
Like, how do we think? He created this whole system of logic, almost like he was mapping out the architecture of reason.
Oh, wow.
And one of his most famous contributions in this area was this concept of syllogisms.
Syllogisms, yes. Okay, I've heard that term, but I'm going to be honest. I'm a little fuzzy on the details.
Okay, sure.
Can you give us a quick, maybe modern day example?
Yeah, totally. So
Yeah.
imagine you're watching like a superhero movie, right?
Okay.
So a syllogism would be like saying all superheroes have superpowers. This character can fly and shoot lasers from their eyes.
Okay.
Therefore, this character is a superhero.
Oh, I see.
So it's about establishing a logical relationship between statements to then reach a conclusion.
Okay, so he basically provided us with the tools for critical thinking,
Exactly.
which is something that's still so relevant even today.
Absolutely.
Now, we can't talk about Aristotle without mentioning his work in natural philosophy, but I've also heard that he got some things, well, wrong.
Yeah, it's true. We have to remember, he was working with the knowledge and the tools that were available at the time.
Yeah.
And while his observations, I mean, they were incredibly revolutionary, without the technology and the understanding we have today,
Right.
some of his conclusions were bound to be inaccurate.
Makes sense.
I think what's important to remember, though, is his process.
Okay.
His systematic approach to actually observing the world and searching for explanations. Like, for example, his four causes.
Ah, yes. The four causes. Now, that's something I've always been curious about. It sounds very philosophical.
Huh.
How can we understand it in a more practical way?
All right, so let's try this. Imagine baking a cake.
Okay, I love cake.
So you have your ingredients, right? That's like your material cause,
Yeah.
what the cake is actually made of. Then you have the recipe.
Right.
So that's like the instructions, the formal cause. The oven, your mixing tools, those are your efficient cause, the actions that bring it all together. And then finally, you have your reason for baking the cake. Maybe it's for a birthday.
Yeah.
That's your final cause, the purpose.
Wow, okay.
So you've got the what it's made of,
Hmm.
how it's structured, the actions to make it, and the why.
That's actually a really clear way to explain it.
It helps to ground it, right?
Yes, because it can seem very abstract. So you're saying that even though some of his scientific findings, let's say, might be outdated, his method of inquiry, his way of asking why, is still incredibly relevant.
Exactly. It's about the process of discovery as much as the discoveries themselves.
That's incredible. It's almost like we're seeing the seeds of modern science being sown right before our very eyes.
And those seeds started to really sprout in his biological studies. I mean, Aristotle was a keen observer of the natural world. Meticulous. I mean, dissecting, categorizing, analyzing animals to identify these patterns, these connections, to try to unlock these secrets of life.
And what's amazing is that some of his observations were surprisingly accurate, even with the limited technology available during his time.
Absolutely. For example, he made observations about things like animal lifespans and even reproductive rates that are actually supported by modern scientific research. It's really quite remarkable.
It really is. It's clear that his curiosity wasn't just confined to the natural world, though. He was also fascinated by us, by human behavior, delving into the realms of ethics and politics, exploring the nature of the good life and the ideal society.
And this is where his concept of the virtuous mean comes into play. This idea that true happiness, true fulfillment are found by striving for balance in all things.
So how does this idea of balance translate into his views on government then? Like, what did Aristotle believe was the purpose of government? And how did that connect to, living a virtuous life?
So for Aristotle, a well-functioning government was really crucial for creating a society where individuals could actually thrive and flourish. He had this belief that humans are by nature social creatures,
Okay.
and that the city-state, or polis as they called it, was really the ideal environment for us to reach our full potential.
So it wasn't just about like individual virtue then.
No.
It was about creating a system that actually fostered virtue in all citizens. or-
Exactly. And this is where that concept of eudaimonia comes in,
Okay.
which is often translated as happiness, but it's actually much richer than that.
Oh, okay.
It's this state of fulfillment, of flourishing that goes beyond just, feeling good. It's about living a life that's in accordance with reason and virtue.
And this is where his idea of finding that virtuous mean becomes so important, right?
Exactly. It's not about extremes. It's about finding balance in all areas of life.
Mm,
And that includes governance.
that makes a lot of sense. So did he have like a specific type of government in mind that he thought was the most ideal for achieving this balance?
Well, he actually explored various forms of government in his work,
Okay.
analyzing their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
And while he didn't necessarily say this one is inherently superior, he did caution against extremes.
Interesting.
Like he believed that tyranny, oligarchy, democracy, in their purest forms, they could easily devolve into these corrupted counterparts.
Right,
It
right.
was about finding that right balance of power representation to prevent those pitfalls.
So almost like a mixed constitution, incorporating elements from different forms of government to try to maintain that balance so that no one group becomes too powerful.
That's a very good way to put it. Now, before we get too caught up in the weeds of ancient Greek politics here,
Right.
I think we need to address the elephant in the room, or rather, the missing chapter in our discussion so far.
Oh, okay. What's that?
We've talked about logic, we've talked about science, ethics, politics,
Hmm.
but we haven't even touched on Aristotle's views on art.
Oh, that's right. I almost forgot about that whole side of him. It is fascinating to think about what someone so grounded in, like logic and observation, thought about something as, I don't know, seemingly subjective as art.
Right, you'd think maybe he'd see it as a distraction from
Yeah.
more serious pursuits,
Right.
but that wasn't the case at all.
Yeah.
Aristotle actually believed that art served a really vital purpose in human life. He saw it as a form of mimesis,
Mimesis.
imitation,
Hmm.
a way for us to explore and understand the human condition in these really profound ways.
So rather than being frivolous, art for Aristotle was actually a tool for deeper understanding.
Exactly. And what about his concept of catharsis?
Ooh, yes. Catharsis. I've heard that term thrown around a lot, but what did he actually mean by that?
Okay, so think of it this way. You're watching a tragic play, right?
Yeah.
And you find yourself getting really drawn into the story, moved by the characters, their struggles. Maybe you even shed a tear or two.
Yeah.
Aristotle believed that experiencing these really intense emotions in a safe, fictional setting could actually be cathartic. Like it purges us of those feelings. And we're left feeling, I don't know, cleansed, renewed.
It's like art gives us this controlled space to confront those emotions.
Exactly.
Interesting. Did he have like a hierarchy of art forms though? Like did he see some as more worthy than others?
He definitely had his opinions. Like in his work, Poetics, he really dives deep into the structures of tragedy, comedy, epic poetry, analyzing their different elements, their effects on the audience.
Interesting.
He even proposed ideas about, what actually made a work of art good or bad based on his whole philosophical framework.
Wow. So for Aristotle, art wasn't just about aesthetics or even entertainment. It was a subject worthy of serious philosophical inquiry.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes his work so enduring. He didn't shy away from exploring any aspect of the human experience, from the natural world to the inner workings of our minds. And that brings us to, I think, a really crucial point. Aristotle's enduring impact. We're not just talking about a brilliant mind here. We're talking about a mind that shaped the trajectory of Western thought for centuries.
Yeah, first teacher really isn't an exaggeration.
Not at all.
I mean, he influenced Islamic scholars, he shaped medieval European thought, had a huge impact on major figures like Thomas Aquinas. It's kind of incredible to think about how his ideas have just echoed through time like ripples in a pond.
It's really remarkable how his work transcended geographical and cultural boundaries, too.
Yeah,
Sparked debates and inspired new ideas across civilization.
totally. And, we can't expect someone from ancient Greece to have gotten everything right about the universe.
Right.
But it's amazing that even when he was, let's say, proven wrong, his methods, his way of approaching knowledge continued to be so influential.
Yeah, he was like a blueprint for how to think, even if the knowledge itself needed updating.
That's a really good way to put it. Like, take someone like Charles Darwin, for instance.
Right.
Completely revolutionized biology with his theory of evolution, but
Yeah.
he still saw value in Aristotle's meticulous observations of the natural world.
Totally. It's about that spirit of inquiry, that dedication to really understanding the why behind the what. That goes beyond just the facts and figures.
It's almost like he provided the scaffolding, upon which later thinkers could build and refine their own ideas.
Yeah.
He may not have had all the answers, but he asked the right questions. And that sparked centuries of intellectual exploration.
I know. It makes you wonder, if Aristotle were alive today, like what would he be studying? What would he make of our 24/7 news cycle, the internet, this constant influx of information, artificial intelligence?
Oh, those are good questions. Can you imagine having him over for dinner
Oh my gosh,
and
yes.
just like picking his brain? I feel like he would be so fascinated by the pace of technological advancement today,
Oh, absolutely.
but also maybe a little concerned about the impact it's having on our ability to think critically, to engage in meaningful dialogue.
Yeah, this is someone who championed reason and balance, remember?
Exactly. Although I can also imagine him making a joke about how Twitter is basically just a modern day agora,
Right.
but with less reasoned debate.
And a lot more shouting into the void.
Exactly.
I can just picture him now scrolling through social media, shaking his head. Too much pathos, not enough logos.
Totally. But jokes aside, I do think he'd be blown away by the access to knowledge that we have today.
Oh, for sure.
It's almost like we're living in a world where his dream of this grand
Yeah.
library, a repository of all human knowledge, has actually been realized.
On a scale he probably couldn't even fathom.
Exactly.
But even with all of this information at our fingertips,
Yeah.
it's so easy to feel overwhelmed,
To-
lost in this sea of like conflicting viewpoints and fleeting trends. And I think that's why Aristotle's emphasis on observation, on critical thinking, on finding meaning is more important today than ever, even in our hyper-connected world.
I totally agree. His ideas are almost more important now than they ever were before, right? We need these tools of discernment to sift through all of the noise and find the signal, to navigate this complex world that we live in. So as we kind of start to wrap up our deep dive into Aristotle's world, I'm curious, what are some of your biggest takeaways?
Well, one thing that really struck me was just his insatiable curiosity.
Yeah.
It wasn't limited to one specific field or discipline. I mean, he was a polymath in the truest sense of the word, driven by this deep, deep desire to understand the world in all of its messy, complicated glory.
That's what I find so inspiring about him. He reminds us that it's okay to be interested in many things, to be a lifelong learner, to embrace that joy of discovery.
And I think even more importantly, he reminds us that knowledge isn't just about memorizing facts or becoming an expert in some really narrow field. It's about cultivating a mindset of curiosity,
Mhm.
of questioning assumptions, of engaging in this constant dialogue with the world around us.
It's like he's saying, don't be afraid to be a student of life.
Right.
Like, find that wonder in unexpected places and never stop asking why.
Exactly. And that actually leads perfectly into a final thought. Something I want to leave you with as we, wrap up our deep dive into Aristotle's world.
Okay.
If he were to, step into our modern world today, what do you think he would say about how we approach knowledge?
Oh, man.
Would he be impressed with all of our technology and advancements?
Right.
Or would he be like, guys, you need to slow down,
Yeah.
cultivate a deeper, more mindful way of understanding yourself and the world around you?
I mean, it really makes you think. It's like, oh, man, we should have him at the dinner party we were talking about
Right.
and just listen to him, break down modern life. But I have a feeling part of it would be like, maybe put the phones down for a little bit
Yeah, like step away from the screen.
and maybe have a real conversation.
Have a real conversation, go outside, touch some grass,
Exactly.
remember nature. I mean, he was all about observing the natural world.
Yeah. He'd probably be a huge proponent of that, actually.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just kind of like a reminder that sometimes the most profound insights come from just slowing down and paying attention,
Totally.
not constantly looking for that next hit of information,
Right.
that next notification.
So, really, when it comes down to it, maybe the greatest gift Aristotle can give us today is that reminder to kind of approach knowledge with a little bit more humility,
Yeah.
to embrace the joy of being a lifelong learner,
Yes.
and to never stop questioning, exploring, and just engaging with the world with all of its complexities and wonders.
It's messy, but it's beautiful.
It is. It is. Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into Aristotle's world, we hope you've walked away with, not just a deeper understanding of his ideas, but also just that renewed sense of curiosity and maybe even a desire to, apply some of his timeless wisdom to your own life.
It's amazing how relevant it still is today.
It really is.
So remember, everyone, the pursuit of knowledge is a journey.
Right.
It's not a destination. So keep asking those questions.
Yeah.
Keep seeking truth. And keep those minds engaged.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And on that note, we'll wrap it up for today. Until next time, keep exploring, and we'll catch you on our next deep dive.